So, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here today for a talk on the Argentina of Javier Milei. We have been organizing this cycle of webinars with the Association for Heterodox Economics, and we have a little team organizing these webinars. And we wanted to discuss today the Argentina of Javier Milei. So, since the beginning of the military dictatorship in March 1976 in Argentina, pro-market visions were imposed by violating human rights in the darkest period of Argentina's history and occupied political thought for more than 4 decades, even in democracy. Although these ideas had a brief pause in the period 2003-2015 under the Kirchner administration, they are still in force and now more than ever under the new administration of Mr. Milei. Mr. Milei has imposed a huge depreciation of the national currency, reducing the purchasing power of workers and an adjustment of public spending by dismissing more than 50,000 public employees under the slogan of efficiency. Inflation has reached 200% per year, and poverty has reached 60% under his administration, which has been in place for less than 5 months. As a heterodox community, we wish to better understand the social and economic consequences of the Milei government, and we will try to discuss the possible alternatives Argentina now faces. For this purpose, I present the chair of our talk today, Cecilia Lanata Briones, is assistant professor in the Department of Economics of the University of Warwick and adjunct researcher of the Centro Interdisciplinario para el Estudio de Políticas Públicas. She's an academic officer and management committee member of the AHHE, as well as management committee member of the Asociación Argentina de Historia Económica and chair of the history section of the Royal Statistical Society. So, Cecilia, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon. For those of us here in Europe, London particularly, and good morning to those of you in the Americas or other places, maybe good evening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Santiago, and everyone for organizing and inviting me to chair this meeting. It's a pleasure to be here. So let me introduce to you first the speakers. Each of them will have 25 minutes to present. And hopefully towards the end, we'll have some time for Q&A, which, as Santiago explained, will not be recorded because we'll stop the recording once the 3 speakers have done their intervention. So let me start by introducing Ramiro Alvarez. He is a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Political Economy and Development Studies at the National University of Moreno in Argentina. He's a specialist in the political economy of Argentina. After his master's in economic development at the National University of San Martin in Argentina, he did his PhD at the University of Siena in Italy. Ramiro teaches basic and advanced economics at different Argentinian universities. He has been a guest professor at the Autonomous University of Santo Domingo due to his studies in political economy, and he published many papers analyzing the political pendulum in Argentina and its impacts on income distribution. He will be the first to talk, and after that, we'll hear the intervention by Matias Bernengo. He is a full professor at Bucknell University. He was formerly a senior research management at the Central Bank of Argentina, an associate professor of economics at the University of Utah, and an assistant professor at Kalamazoo College at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. He has been an external consultant to several United Nations organizations, including the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, the International Labour Organization, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and the United Nations Development Program. He has edited 8 books, 2 books, and more than 120 articles published in scientific peer-reviewed journals or book chapters. He specializes in macroeconomic issues for developing countries, in particular Latin America, international political economy, and the history of economic ideas. He's also the emeritus founding co-editor of the Review of Keynesian Economics and co-editor-in-chief of the New Palgrave Dictionary of Economics. After he speaks, we will hear from Maria Carolina Moises. She is a distinguished Argentine politician and political scientist with a rich career dedicated to public service and political advocacy. Beginning her political journey with foundational education from the University of Belgrano, where she earned a degree in political science, she has been a pivotal figure in Argentine politics. Her early academic achievements were complemented by international exposure through a program at the University of Berkeley, Boston, which broadened her perspective on governance and public policy. Carolina's political career is marked by her tenure as national senator for Jujuy since December 10, 2023, showcasing her continued relevance and leadership in Argentine politics. Prior to this role, she served as national deputy for Jujuy between December 18, 2017 and December 10, 2023, and previously from December 10, 2005 to December 9, 2009, where she was known for her passionate advocacy and significant legislative contributions, including her involvement in the landmark audiovisual media law. As a speaker, Maria Carolina Moises brings a wealth of experience, a profound understanding of political dynamics, and a visionary approach to addressing contemporary challenges. Her career is a testament to her unwavering dedication to public service, making her an inspiring figure in Argentine politics and beyond. So, Ramiro, the floor is all yours. We're eager to listen to you.
Well, thank you so much to the organizer of this webinar. I will present, I don't know if I can share my screen. Yes, I think, are you, I think I'm presenting. I don't know if you, yes, well,
Yes.
sorry. Well, when Santiago invited me to talk about the Argentina of Javier Milei, I thought that it was particularly important to understand the inflationary becoming of Argentina and the inflationary experiences over these 20 years in order to understand the political the crisis of political representation in Argentina that allows the rise of Milei. So at that time we were writing with Florencia Medici a paper related with Argentina inflation. And I thought that also presenting this, the main result and some theoretical background of this paper would be a good idea to provide Matthias and also Carolina the historical inputs to think about well this 3 month of Milei's government and what we can expect about this new political regime driven by extreme right-wing parties and ideas. So the contribution of the paper is associated with a theoretical comprehension between two traditions in to understand inflation, particularly the classical the classical Keynesian approach, also called the classical political economy, and we were inspired in this framework, particularly because we think that underlines the political drivers of income distribution, the political determinants of income distribution, and also, of course, the political nature of inflation, understanding inflation as a phenomena of conflict over income distribution, a conflict between different social groups for increasing their share in income and the idea was how to, over these 20 years, explain the different, I would say, changes in bargaining power over these social groups, and how over this inflationary trend we can observe different distributive configuration over the past, and how over the last 10 years the inflation coexist with falling in or stagnation in real wages. So the theoretical background, as I said, was these main contributions, this canonical contribution within classical political economy related with inflation: Occhio 1977, Stirati 2001, Pivetti 2007, and Serrano 2010. This contribution has as a main thesis the idea that inflation driven by distributive conflicts associated particularly with the idea that neither workers or capitalists or landowners has the sufficient power to prevent that once they impose their material interest to income distribution, they cannot prevent that other social group will react by changing their nominal wages and changing the final outcome of income distribution. So the idea that this is another concept that I will reframe when I will try to explain some Argentinian historical particularities. The idea that there is a sort of hegemonic vacancy in the society that perpetuate the variables, the changing in nominal variables over income distribution that creates increasing nominal prices. So the idea that that there is distributive conflict in an economy, in a capitalist economy, manifests as a nominal wage and price spiral are the main diagnostic that I will present in terms of explaining Argentinian inflation. But as I said, this theoretical background was developed for economies that that they are not or are not capturing the asymmetric condition between different economies. For instance, the idea that there is a peripheral or central economies and peripheral economies. And this is the reason that we with Florencia understood that there is a necessity of a convergence and a theoretical integration between the classical political economy and the Latin American structuralist approach as well. Latin American structuralist approach is an economic school that highlight the idea that peripheral economies are pretty different from central economies, and the main difference is the dependency conditions of this economy. When we talk about dependency condition, we are referring the idea that there is technical dependencies, but also financial dependencies, as well as the condition of these economies of being a price taker in the international market as well. Technical dependencies is a very important condition in that reshape Argentinian distributive conflict, because it put in the center of the distributive conflict the nominal exchange rate as a distributive variable. This is an important feature because explaining the trend and the dynamic of nominal distributive nominal exchange rate will be extremely important to understand how price dynamic takes different trends and go deeper in changing inflation regime, going to a, for instance, high inflation regime or even hyperinflation regime. So we understand that the idea to explain how the exchange rate is determined is particularly important. And not all the exchange rate is not only affected by technological dependencies and the necessity to import and to have international currency to purchase imported input, but also to repay, for instance, foreign debts. But also the idea that this economy, we have also to take in consideration that in explaining inflationary dynamics in Argentina, the Argentine economy is a price taker economy. So whenever there is a changes, for instance, in agricultural, sorry, there is something, I think that I can hear someone that has the microphone. Oh, thank you so much. So that whenever there is a changes in international prices, for instance, in the export basket, this affect also the domestic distributive conflict by, for instance, changing a price shock and decreasing real wages and trigger, for instance, wage claims. So these structural features of peripheral economy must be taken into consideration when we talk about inflation dynamics, for instance, in Argentina, but because they are particularly important in understand the drivers and how inflation will behave over the period. In this, in the main references, if you are not familiarized with this theoretical approach, for instance, we take in consideration Tavares Veloso, 1986, and also Portantiero, 1977. This last contribution is particularly important in order to understand also historical and political specificities of Argentina. Argentina is an economy, is a society that since the emergence of Peronism can be characterized as a hegemonic vacancy or that there is a political stalemate in the society, because workers are sufficiently empowered, but not enough empowered to prevent other social groups to react. But for instance, generated a lockout of exports or some kind of organization by entrepreneurs or land ownership to change the real wage dynamics and the distributive configuration as well. So when taking in consideration these specificities, we can understand and present that in peripheral economies, inflation driven by distributive conflict is re-expressed into a wage, nominal wage, and a nominal exchange rate expiral that generate the dynamic that perpetuate inflation all the over the period. It's important to understand that whether in this scenario there is the supremacy of nominal wages or the supremacy of the exchange rate, this will generate different distributive configuration that coexist with inflation. So when there is the supremacy of nominal wage dynamic, we can observe real wages in an inflationary regime. But when there is the supremacy of the exchange rate, so constant devaluations that overcompensate the nominal wage, we can observe an inflationary regime that coexists with the decrease of real wages. So this distinction is important, and these two scenarios are important because, as I will present in a few minutes. When we analyze the inflationary period in Argentina since 2003 to 2023, we can observe different distributive configurations and a structural change. Particularly, we identified in 2011 and more precisely, or particularly in 2018, that there are some political events that change the balance of power in the society and change also the distributive configuration, generating a distributive inflation with, for instance, decreasing real wages that, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, was is still today the phenomena that we are observing in Argentina: high inflation with real wages, the purchasing power of wages that decrease sharply. So the important to say is that the outcome of this the inflationary regime in terms of income distribution will depend on the political will of the government to impose a scenario instead of another, and its capacity to sustain this scenario by imposing exchange rate policies, monetary policies, income policies, even fiscal policies can be imposed in order to, well, prevent the idea or prevent the scenario of a high inflation regime go with increasing real wages to a inflationary scenario with low real wages, with decreasing real wages. So in this sense, in order to understand the capacity of a state to impose, for instance, to affect or to control the dynamic of the exchange rate, we can say, for instance, inspired in Tavares and Beluso 1986, that the state, the government's ability to manage, for instance, the valuation expectation and the exchange rate market is particularly affected, by and particularly challenged in a context of a high external indebtedness, financial volatility, and widespread indexation. For instance, during the 1980s, during the high or the debt crisis in all the Latin American region, but particularly in Argentina, and the hyperinflation crisis in 1989, the high indebtedness of the economy and the political and economic dependencies of the economy with respect to, for instance, of the IMF or international creditors, creates a scenario in which the state was particularly weak in terms of impose the exchange rate dynamic. And whenever there is, for instance, a labor-based government or some kind of a government that are more likely to prioritize the interests of workers instead of capitalists, well, there is no capacity to control or to increase real wages or nominal wages in a higher dynamic than the exchange rate, because of the low external reserves or the pressure with respect of the IMF to creating devaluation and to take crowd impact policies that indexate the exchange rate and devaluate the national currency all the time, creating a price shock, and this price shock that perpetuates drives unions to react, but the eventual adjustment of nominal wages triggers devaluation expectation quickly, and this creates, well, the necessity of the central bank to avoid a huge demand of foreign currency in the exchange market to increase nominal interest rate. This increase the cost of credits. This affect the interest of capitalists that employ capital in a productive structure, that by increasing the cost of credits, and, well, again, the necessity to devaluate and to increase the margin of exports. So this creates a dynamic that perpetuates inflation in a cycle that cannot stop until, well, stabilization programs will eventually, with different mechanism, control the exchange rate as an essential anchor of prices in economy of like Argentina. So when we analyze the historical experience in Argentina since 2003 to 2023, we observe that here in this graph we observe the monthly consumer price index variation in the gray line, and the monthly wage index variation in the black line. And as you can observe in this 12th year, the trend followed by the wage variation is systematically over the trend followed by price variation. This is as an indicator that there is a inflation regime with increasing real wages. But nevertheless, we as well can observe that this supremacy is not a sustained supremacy, but because there is also a convergence of these two trends. Particularly as we closer to the end of the 2015, we observed that during the last 4 years of this period, nominal exchange rate was particularly difficult to sustain the dynamic below the wage variations. So this is particularly important because, well, I put also identify different political events during this period. I would like to highlight, for instance, the wage regulation imposed in 2004 that empower labor movement and the bargaining power of workers in collective wage negotiation, but and this creates the political margin to increase nominal wages in a dynamic that overcompensate the dynamic of the wage of the exchange rate. But particularly in 2008 and more specifically in 2012, there are particular political events: the arriving of external constraint, the increasing the decreasing of international reserves that decrease the power of the state to maintain this distributive configuration. And devaluation become more likely during this period than during the first government administration of the Kirchner period. When we go to the other, the last 10 years, from this period to 2016 to 2023, we observe exactly the opposite scenario, when the dynamic followed by the exchange rate and the price dynamic systematically overcompensate the dynamic followed by the wage dynamics. And this is as an indicator that during this period, as I said, you can observe in this graph also the annual variation of the wage, of the real wage. During this period, the wage rate in the majority of the years falls. So this is particularly related with other political events that enforced the capacity of the state to control exchange rate, particularly the standby agreement with the IMF in 2018 that increased in a huge way the external indebtedness and the necessity to repayment this external debt will be an important factor to understand the exchange rate and the price dynamic of the period. So also, as I said, well, other features, other political events, like for instance the Russo-Ukrainian war. This is associated with external shocks that increase the same prices of the agrarian product that Argentinian exports with respect to Ukraine. And this is particularly important to understand inflation because these are prices that affect the wage basket. No, all these prices are agrarian prices, prices that affect the purchasing power of wages, and this worsened the dynamic that the real wages were observing in this period. So all this scenario, I think, that are important to understand, that create a political crisis in terms of representation, particularly because during the last 4 years, the majority of the society in the election of 2019 supported a government that presents itself as a labor-based government. So the idea was that the government, the Fernandez government, came to change this dynamic of the real wage that I'm presenting here. But this was not what happened in reality for different political and as I said, the political constraint, but as I say, external constraint associated, for instance, the IMF, the standby agreement of the IMF. So this is important to understand how the traditional political tools that the worker movement, the labor movement has to impose the material interest fail in generating the distributive configuration desired by workers. And in this sense, well, the political result in 2023, the last year, it seems pretty obvious why the majority of Argentinians were more likely to vote some kind of figure that was completely outside of the traditional parties in Argentina.
Ramiro, oh, okay, you're wrapping up. Great.
Yes,
Thanks.
yes. Sorry. So in order to end the presentation, I would like to address some special ideas and to set the discussion in the following presentation and the discussion later. Well, why inflationary dynamics between 2003 and 2011 was characterized by the predominance of wage dynamic over exchange rate dynamics, increasing the wage in dollars and real wages. The dynamic between 2011 and 2023 changed this supremacy. The period between 2003 and 2011 shows a trend toward the exhaustion of the supremacy of wages. And this exhaustion is particularly related with the overcoming with the external constraint as a new characteristic of the macroeconomic behavior of Argentina. And in the period between 2016 2023, well, there are distinguish two sub-periods, very different, but with very different in political terms, but not in terms of distributive configuration. Between 2016 2019, a great supremacy of the exchange rate dynamics over wages, therefore a huge decrease in real wages during Macri administration, during the imposing of neoliberal policies. And between 2020 2023, well, we can observe a convergence of these two dynamics, nominal dynamics, but not a fundamental change in income distribution, more likely more similar to the one that we observed in the previous political regime. So I would say, as I said, this creates a crisis in terms of political representation, setting the stage of Milei emergence. So, well, thank you so much for inviting me and for presenting these results.
Great, thank you so much, Ramiro, for sharing this this work with us. Matias, if you're ready, we are
I'm still
Yes.
yeah.
Oh,
There we go. If you're ready, we're all ears.
yes, I won't present PowerPoint. First, let me thank the Association for Heterodox Economics and particularly Santiago that invited me. I thank and also complain because it's not fun to talk about Milei, and so but it's probably important to reflect a little bit of how we got into this. And so what I'm switching a little bit, and I'm Ramiro had sent me the presentation, so I was planning to say a couple of more things about inflation, but I would refrain myself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a paper that I wrote in Spanish, which is a comment and a variation of an old thesis in Argentina, and I have the little pamphlet with me, the Argentinian pendulum, until when, by Marcelo Diaman. I wrote for the 40th anniversary of democracy, the return of democracy last year in Argentina, a little piece for journal Coyuntura y Desarrollo de FIDE, a little piece that is a reflection on how we got into this pendulum and go back and forth between neoliberal policies and call it national, popular, whatever you want to call it, alternatives in the country, which it's directly connected with what Ramiro was discussing before, and perhaps I see it less exceptional in the case of Argentina. In many ways, I think that we have made choices in the macro policy, but I do think that that's part of a problem that the region has, and explains to a great extent the limitations and the inability to get out of the underdevelopment trap that Latin America has been sort of since the 80s, sort of trapped. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about, the what I call the Argentinian pendulum, and what Milei represents in that sort of long trajectory that it's at this point is almost as old as I am. I left Argentina. My family left Argentina a year before the coup in '75, and at around that time, 75 is even before the coup, when the sort of neoliberal sort of swing moves in a particular direction. So the main point I want to make, so there's if you read the international press on Milei, and even his own sort of self-described political goals, he talks a lot about the caste and how he's coming to sort of clean up all of the political system, and it's a new phenomenon. And the international press also, sort of discusses him as, being sort of something absolutely new. And part of the story is that he is a variation of something that, has been happening in Argentina for about 50 years or so. It's just one more iteration of this. What I do disagree with our friend Marcelo Diaman is that I don't think that this is the pendulum that he was referring to, and he misdiagnosed the 1976-83 experience of the military. He was riding at the cusp at the end of that experiment. I think that there was a significant change. I think that those changes are less explained simply by Argentinian phenomena. So I'm here. I'm going to deflate a little bit the Argentinian exceptionalism. I think that those things were determined to a great extent in the center. So it's a story that at the end of the day, it's more dependent on decisions that were made in the United States than by the elites in Argentina, and you can go and think about this in almost any other country in the region. And so the old pendulum is essentially the story that Ramiro was talking about. It's a story that on the one hand tells you something about inflation, but it also tells you something about the limits to development. So it's a story in which you have an economy that it's, and I should say, it's important. Argentina and its specificities, as Ramiro was, talking, have some important. Argentina is a stereotype, so I think that's why the exceptionalism comes very strong. It's almost the stereotype of a peripheral country. It was very much, the idea of a peripheral country that exports commodities and imports manufactured goods is essentially Argentina and England. And not surprisingly, it is in Argentina that Prebisch by the 30s will think of this idea of center and periphery. And so it is also because of the particular strength of certain social groups associated to the exports of the agrarian sector, very much this caricature almost of the distributive conflict, and so of the society, as Ramiro was saying, that has a persistent hegemonic stalemate that cannot get sort of out of it. But that allows us to think of two things. On the one hand, you have coalitions that come, and to promote. By the 30s, I think it was sort of clear that industrialization was the path to development. And this, what I want to emphasize, this wasn't contested. Think of the stalemate that he was talking as the stop and go that Kalecki talks about England. So you will have that, labor will come, will promote growth and redistribution to our workers. That may bring the economy close to full employment. You'll have some sort of, higher wages and so on and so forth, and inflationary pressures building up. And you'll have a conservative government that will come back and retrench and adjust. The austerity here, as Kalecki himself said, is purely political, just to bring down the wages of the workers. And you have a stop and go economy. That stop and go economy in Latin America is the sort of wage exchange rate spiral, which I should say I think my paper is the first formalization of that model. It's 20 years old. I might be wrong about that. Somebody did it before. Not the first to have the idea, but the first to put in the math of that little model. And you know, and it's essentially the same thing. We had bouts of growth and you know, and which were with high inflation, higher than, you know, at the center. But that reached a balance of payment constraint, and you know, and that brought the retrenchment and so on and so forth. What is important in this story is that the Argentinian conservatives, you know, which we called liberals in the old European tradition, and you can go down and see the names of these people. You know, the finance ministers, you know, the Kriegers Bacenas, the, you know, whoever it was, the, you know, the Alzogaray, and so on and so forth. They were not against industrialization. They like the Tories of the 50s. What they did is they managed, or Eisenhower in the US, they managed an economy that, you know, essentially was transformed by the left. In case of Argentina, by the national, you know, popular governments, the Peronis. And, you know, but they didn't try to retrench. Onganía, when he comes in Argentina, the military dictatorship of the 60s, he's industrialist. You know, they're not against it. There is one project for the country. It's all well known that you'll have industrialization. You'll have industrialization with high wages or industrialization with low wages, but industrialization it is. There's no alternative. There's no two models of the country. Development is one thing. That was the story. By the 70s, after there is a neoliberal turn, after you have, you know, the sort of collapse of the Keynesian consensus, after you have, for a lot of questions that I don't have the time to, I'm sorry to say, to discuss with you, as much as you will have in the United States, you know, slowly, because it's a period of crisis, but Friedman becomes relevant, and you'll have Thatcher and Reagan. But, you know, I should say it's Carter and Callahan first that make the switch. So it's bipartisan too. They move into a mood of destruction of what's going on in them. So there are now two models, and that happens in Argentina with the dictatorship. So the pendulum now is swinging, but it's not swinging and accepting that we're going to grow with higher or lower wages. On top of this, we're going to deindustrialize. We're going to destroy a lot of the stuff that, you know, has been constructed. I just gave, by the way, this sort of version of this talk in Colombia, and there is a phrase that I love from Garcia Marquez on, you know, the general, you know, and his labyrinth, and the, you know, and he puts in the words of Bolivar, you know, that everything that we do with our hands, they unmake with their feet. You know, and that's exactly what it is. You know, you come and you build, and then they destroy. And so it's much more destructive. When you discuss why this happened, a lot of people in Argentina say, well, in Argentina that happened because the bourgeoisie was very weak. And this didn't happen in countries like Brazil because the bourgeoisie and the industrial bourgeoisie was much stronger. And so the problem of Argentina is its specificity, the fact that Argentina has a very strong rural, you know, sort of sector, and so on and so forth. And I always say, look at the numbers of deindustrialization in Brazil. They're exactly the same as in Argentina. It didn't matter where you were. You know, I mean, it did matter in Mexico, in which they destroyed their industry, but they created a maquila sort of sector, which goes back to the 60s, by the way, and integrated because of the proximity, you know, in different ways that we did. But, you know, the Southern, you know, the South America is all sort of more or less the same, and certainly the two large countries that, you know, went further in industrialization, which is Argentina and Brazil, you know, are essentially the same in that respect. So this swing now is considerably more problematic than the previous one, because now we do have two kinds of models, and there is not an acceptance that the idea of industrialization is the way to development. So now we have a model that it's industrialization trying to bring higher wages, and certainly Ramiro is right that up to about, you know, if you look at his data up to the 2015 or so, there is, you know, when the last iteration of a, you know, relatively strong popular government with the two, you know, the three Kirchner governments, you know, the Nestor and the two, you know, presidencies of Cristina, you know, wages go up, and the previous peak was with Perón in the 70s, and you have to go for the previous period in the 50s. So there is a clear sort of, you know, you can put the graph of the real wages in Argentina over time, and you'll see the cycle that we, you know, essentially me and Ramiro were talking about. And I should say that obviously now with Milei, there has been sort of a significant, reduction. They do come, Macri said it, they do come to reduce the wages. So you have that with the dictatorship. They reduce wages. They did that with Menem. And again, that tells you that it is a peculiar sort of thing because, there you have neoliberal Peronism in the 90s, but, exactly the same role as the sort of other versions of neoliberalism. So neoliberalism comes and this deindustrializing, destructive sort of, movement of the swing of the pendulum, swing of the pendulum comes with all flavors. It's not necessarily, a military dictatorship. It sometimes looks like democratic, sometimes looks like, and it's disguised as a popular sort of movement. Certainly Menem was that. So what you see in Milei actually is, it's the fourth iteration of this. I would say what's characteristic of him, and I think it's sort of different, is that the dictatorship, of course, was outright authoritarian. 30,000 people disappeared and killed, and so on and so forth, torture and this, that, and the other. Menem did, give he freed the military that the Kirchners then will put for different crimes back in jail. But democratic, transformation of the constitution by an agreement with the democratic parties. Macri, the only democratically elected that looks like the Argentinian elites of the 19th century that our friend Milei actually likes and loves and refers to all the time. And Milei actually is sort of an outsider. He looks more like a Trump. He's somewhat of an outsider of that elite, but he has a profound love of that, and he does bring a certain authoritarian sort of vein into all of this. So that broadly, telling you there's nothing particularly new in all of this. So as I said at the beginning, what we're seeing is one more iteration of these severe problems. So I don't have a lot of time. So what I want to do in this last time is think a little bit of how we ended up with Milei and what are the sort of prospects of this new iteration of the neoliberal project. So I think that the neoliberal project always tries to tie the hands of the next progressive government that might come back to power. And one of the sort of fundamental instruments of that historically was always the IMF. The IMF always worked as a sort of an instrument of creditor countries that sort of limits the ability of developing countries to manage their economy. If you look at the whole period, and somebody here can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but whenever Argentina went for the first time to the IMF, which is in the late 50s, 57 perhaps, is the first sort of agreement, all the way to to now. The only period that Argentina was not under some sort of IMF agreement is the period in which Nestor Kirchner paid down, as Lula did back then, I should say, in Brazil, paid down the IMF. IMF almost closed. I've had conversations with economists that work at the IMF and suggest that they were very close to not having any business to do because we tend to be a big chunk of what they do. From 2006 to 2018, Argentina didn't have, was not under the tutelage of the sort of macroeconomic policies of the IMF. All the rest of it, when people say, "Oh, Argentina is always doing populist policies," and that's look at what I'm saying. Almost the whole period, going back to the 50s, Argentina is always under some sort of agreement with the IMF. And in the 90s, we do have on top of that a convertibility program that essentially it's equivalent to dollarization, which was, as it was, incredibly hard to get rid of. It's just not harder to get rid than dollarization itself. If you don't believe me, ask Ecuadorians. So part of the story of how we ended up with Milei is in the graphs that I think Ramiro was showing you. So I have one thesis. I think if you look at Argentina stopped growing in 2011. So in 2011, we sort of stagnated, and fundamentally for almost a decade and a half now we stagnated. I'm not sure, But if you put a graph and put when Vernengo entered the Central Bank of Argentina, which was 2011, and then you see what happened, I say, maybe not causality, but there is a correlation. So ever since, the economy has not grown again. So part of the story is we opted to do something. We opted because of the sorts of things that Ramiro was saying. We opted to, there was a belief that the exchange rate was central for an industrializing sort of project. So we opted to have a crawling peg sort of kind of arrangement, unofficial, it's never quite explicitly sort of discussed. And that with the, sort of high resistance that we do have, and strong unions associated to a left of center, Peronist party, we have the spiral that explains a good chunk of our inflation. Once we hit that external constraint, which was about 2011, we cannot grow it anymore. So that's just, I mean, it's as simple as that. So now we're going to have a pendulum, but growth we cannot have, and we're going to have this sort of push back and forth of the wages in an economy that on top of everything is sort of stagnated. And that, of course, is to a great extent what explains the first Macri, and then on top of all of the things that happened, during the Fernandez government, so you have the pandemic and whatnot, why we end up with a lot of people that traditionally, in the periphery of Buenos Aires even, that traditionally would vote for Peronist that, ended up voting, at least in proportions that allowed a significant victory of Milei. So that's how we ended politically with this sort of thing. What is the plan and what I think he's doing? So a couple of things that I want to say before I run out of time, which I might soon. So first of all of the people, he that suggest that this is resolvable with the fiscal adjustment. And I'm saying this because there are a lot of quote unquote heterodox people that keep insisting that a fiscal adjustment is sort of necessary to resolve these things. And so I want to discuss a little bit what the fiscal adjustment, why is it, and what is it doing right now, this supposed fiscal adjustment that Milei did. And also think a little bit about what dollarization will do if he had time, if he manages to do it. And I'm afraid that he might. And so, first of all, the two things that he did since he entered. So, I'm going to skip all of that, and I hope the senator will talk a lot about the sort of the broader sort of agenda of transformation of society that, he tried to pass through Congress and will sort of negotiate, I suppose, with governors. But the cutting of the brutal cutting of spending, so he cut all investment, it's gone. He stopped some payments that those are fiscal gimmicks. He stopped some payments that will have to be done. And so the idea that he actually did a fiscal adjustment and that the deficit is zero is sort of absolutely incorrect. But at any rate, he did cut brutally all of that. We're going to have a humongous recession. So the IMF says that it's about 2.8. I think the IMF is wrong. So I think it's going to be worse than that. Maybe somebody wants to correct me, but I think it's going to be a significant and large recession. Also, he devalued the official exchange rate, and so the depreciation was 100%. So it goes from 400 to 800 to close the gap with the parallel exchange rate. And again, a lot of people say, "Oh, this is important and was central." And what he managed with that is accelerate inflation. And again, he accelerated inflation was 11%. I saw the news, just in the last month was 11%. So we're talking of inflation that it's 250%. He received it at about 140. So he accelerated inflation. Not an accident. He has reduced wages brutally. From what I saw, we're talking at least something between a quarter or a third of the value of wages have been, completely wiped out. He is wiping out the value of pensions. So all of those things are happening. So we're going to have a massive, brutal recession with incredible sort of negative social consequences. That, of course, will do what? And it's already doing it. It's holding the wages. In the wage exchange rate spiral, that holds the wages. That's why there has been a deceleration of inflation. Inflation decelerated a little bit from the heights of December when he devalued crazily and January. But deceleration of inflation is still inflation. I don't know how many of you know about the Jumbo bot, that this idiot that, it's our president sort of thought that we had deflation. Of course, we don't have deflation, and that was sort of a hoax. We only have deceleration of inflation. Inflation will continue to be high for quite a bit in Argentina. There's no doubt about that. So he's holding that. What is the sort of pessimistic scenario that I have? The pessimistic scenario is that we're going to have a brutal recession. Imports will fall significantly. If we have a normal year of exports, and we had, because of climate change, terrible years in the last few years. So among the sort of 10 plagues of Egypt that Fernandez had, in his government, one was, global warming and terrible sort of export revenues. So we're going to have that. We also finish a gasoduct, and that will allow to import less, natural gas. So all of a sudden, the current account looks better, and we accumulate reserves. Also, the IMF, although there is all of this stuff, they're having their spring meeting, the IMF changed a lot, but the IMF also, when they come, the IMF ask for a depreciation of the peso in between the primaries and the election of 22%, which accelerated inflation in the middle of an election. The second time the IMF interferes in an Argentinian election, if you ask me. So the IMF does like these people. He went to Davos and everybody loved him, saying all of the same, part of my French, crap that everybody says all the time when they go there, neoliberal imbecilities. Yeah, there's no better definition for that. So he goes there and says all of those idiocies, and everybody's clapping. Oh, this is all new ideas. We never heard of this. Like, we haven't been hearing this since Hayek 70 years ago. So he does all of this. What happens next? He gets some money from the IMF. And he has enough dollars to dollarize. And once he dollarizes, the following year, it doesn't need to be this year. I'm saying the year subsequent to that, you have what? First of all, wages are, because you're destroying the conflict and the ability, the bargaining power of workers with all the unemployment and the big social crisis. You hold the exchange rate with dollarization, the spiral is gone. So he stabilizes. I saw this movie. I mean, that's the problem. I've been seeing this movie. It's a nightmare, I've been seeing this movie always. So he stabilizes the economy, and it will recover. So I'm too old. I'm getting tired of this crap. They tell you Greece is recovering. Greece GDP is 20% below its peak in 2007. So of course Argentina will recover. Once you have a recession that it's brutal, it will recover. That's not a recovery. A recovery used to be for, half-brained economists that you surpass the previous peak. If you don't surpass the peak, it's not a recovery. So we're just going to start growing again. But that has political implications. You start growing again, prices are falling down. And all of a sudden, this idiot that cannot differentiate a bot and thinks that there is deflation in Argentina might have a chance to make all of the other transformations, the political ones, that would make it way harder for a national popular government that comes back eventually, because it will eventually come back, because this will explode. And we saw this movie, to do anything that it's necessary for growth. I'm sorry, I'm a bit angry with all of this. Thank you very much.
That was very insightful, Matias. Thank you very, very, very much. And actually, you were quite bang on time. So thank you for that too. Carolina, now is your turn. Remember, everyone, that she's going to be speaking in Spanish and Manuel is going to be doing the live translation. So please bear with us.
Hola, buenas. Desde el Senado estoy logrando conectar. Muchísimas gracias a todos por la invitación, especialmente Manuel Cruz. Manuel se encargará de la traducción. Hola, Manuel.
Yeah, I'll be doing the translation. So basically, thank you all for being here and inviting me to this exposition. And I am currently at the Argentine Senate.
Bueno, yo me voy a apoyar en unas placas que hemos preparado junto con nuestro equipo. Estoy tratando de conectar ahí. Ahí está, ¿verdad?
Sí, perfecto. So I'll be presenting with this PowerPoint.
Vamos a empezar, vamos a tratar de hacerlo ágil con la introducción. Bueno, la exposición ronda en los primeros 4 meses del gobierno de Javier Milei, como ustedes saben, y comparto el enojo de Matías, pero además convivo con toda esta cantidad de situaciones que ha puesto a la Argentina casi en una vertiginosa cantidad de información y de medidas que claramente, como lo dijo él, van destrozando todo lo que hemos podido construir, tanto en el
So,
sistema económico como en el fortalecimiento de nuestra democracia a través de las instituciones que hoy son representativas de la división de poderes.
so the exposition is going to be, of course, around the first 4 months of the Milei's government, and as you all know, and I share with Matthias, there has been a lot of information and great damage to institutions that had been dismantled and destroyed, but I, as part of the Senate, have been suffering it in first person.
Así es, por eso el marco de análisis que le quería presentar, perdón, necesito pasar ahí está. Es, bueno, si esto es una nueva forma de neoliberalismo, ¿no? Porque nosotros vemos que no se trata solo de políticas económicas, monetarias, austríacas o lo que fuera, ni tampoco de la centralidad de los mercados financieros, sino que se trata de una forma de racionalidad política que se ha vuelto mundial y consiste en imponer en la economía, en la sociedad y en el propio Estado la lógica del capital hasta convertirla en su forma normal de funcionamiento.
So the first question that we pose is if this is a new form of neoliberalism, that doesn't only deal with economic policies, monetary, be it Austrian or otherwise, but and it does not just center in the financial markets, but it's also rationality, a rationale in politics that has become, of course, as you all know, a world phenomenon, and it consists of putting the economy and society and the very same state in the capital's logic of functioning and transforming it into something else.
El nuevo neoliberalismo ya no necesita una imagen neoliberal o democrática, porque lo que busca, sobre todo lo hemos visto justamente con Milei acá en Argentina, es canalizar los resentimientos de un amplio sector de la población, en general con baja formación ciudadana y falta de identidad nacional, a su vez bastante separado de los sistemas de protección del Estado, transformando esa masa popular justamente en la excusa para poder sostener sus políticas.
So this new neoliberalism doesn't need a neoliberal image or a democratic image anymore, as it's basically searching, as we just said here in Argentina, to channel the resentments of a large bulk of society, in general, with low political involvement and changing, and the lack of national identity. Also, far away from apart from the states, the welfare state, and transforming this popular base into an excuse to sustain its neoliberal policies.
Así es, por eso nosotros decimos que la diferencia con el viejo liberalismo, que aquel, digamos, sostenía la apertura, el progreso, las libertades individuales, el Estado de Derecho, como lo decía recién en la década del 90, nosotros vivimos un proceso similar, o en los Estados Unidos, donde se conjuga el cierre de fronteras, la construcción de muros, el culto a la nación, la soberanía del Estado, la ofensiva contra los derechos humanos. Entonces, ¿cómo es posible esta, digamos, nosotros evaluamos que hay una metamorfosis del neoliberalismo como tal con este nuevo neoliberalismo que impone, como recién decían, una visión única.
So the old neoliberalism of the 90s pushed for open borders, for individual liberties, for rule of law, and as it was said in the 90s, that we in Argentina had a similar process, or in the US, right now it's pushing for closing the borders, for building walls, for it's going back to a call to the nation and national sovereignty, while also it's pushing against human rights, which again it poses a question if neoliberalism worldwide is having a transformation into this new neoliberalism with the same view overall.
Bueno, entonces vamos a, ¿qué sería esta nueva forma de neoliberalismo? Nosotros buscamos una definición de Amy Kapczynski, vicedecana de la Facultad de Derecho de la Universidad de Yale, Estados Unidos, donde lo define como una lógica de gobernanza que está orientada a aumentar el poder de los actores del mercado y disminuir totalmente la autoridad política sobre esos actores. Wendy Brown tiene ese hermoso término que dice reformatear el capitalismo. Creemos que es un reformateo del capitalismo en términos generales, no solo por aumentar el poder de los actores privados y su capacidad extractiva de ganancias, sino también para desactivar totalmente el control democrático de esos actores.
We research Amy Kapczynski's definition. She's a faculty of Yale at the US, in the US, where she defines the governance logic that is focused in increasing the power of market actors of the market, basically, and to lower the political authority over these actors. Wendy Brown also has a definition that states that it's trying to reboot capitalism, and not only in general terms, but also in the sense of trying to increase the power of private actors and their capacity to extract profits, and also to deactivate completely the democratic control of those actors.
Y ahí vamos cómo funciona este nuevo neoliberalismo. Entonces, con cada crisis, el gobierno se radicaliza más, entonces empieza una espiral negativa donde hay que ajustar la economía se ajusta, cae la recaudación impositiva y para tener superávit hay que ajustar aún más. Y en esa espiral es como se va a fondo con cada crisis. Con el pretexto de superarla, nosotros entendemos que las profundiza.
Okay. So in this new neoliberalism, every time that there's a crisis, the government radicalizes itself more, and there's a downward spiral where the government has to adjust the economy. It has to do austerity measures, and as it does, the tax collection also falls. Then in order to have a surplus, it has to do more austerity. And in this downward trend, this downward spiral, you have deeper and deeper crisis. And we think that in order to get over it, perdón, para superarla, Carolina?
Justifica el ajuste
Overcome.
y provoca la crisis.
To overcome.
And then basically it's part of the political strategy to justify the further austerity measures in the previous crisis.
De alguna manera, lo que provocan es políticas que justifican el ajuste para superar la crisis, pero justamente esas políticas multiplican la crisis económica.
Yeah, and of course, these austerity measures are amplifying each crisis, and it's a never-ending spiral.
Entonces, hay un ataque permanente al Estado en sí mismo y lo que se busca es la destrucción del Estado como tal.
There's a permanent attack to the state authority, and in the goal seems to be the destruction of the state itself.
Atacan las políticas públicas, calificándolas de ineficientes, de mal gasto, de que generan déficit fiscal. Con esos tres elementos eliminan determinadas políticas públicas del Estado, incluso ministerios y programas de distintas índoles, diciendo que son ineficientes. Entonces los desfinancian y claramente en muy poco tiempo se transforman en más ineficientes de lo que eran y con eso justifican el cierre de instituciones del Estado y el achicamiento del Estado en general.
So they attack public policies, portraying them as inefficient, as being a bad expenditure, bad investments that generate public deficit. And with these three elements, they start erasing the state's public policies that include ministries and programs of different sorts. Always the key element is to portray them as inefficient, and as they start to constrain the budget of these programs, in a very short time, they indeed become inefficient. And with this, they end up justifying the closure of the state and the reduction of the state in general.
Bueno, y ahí vamos a, después de definir este nuevo neoliberalismo muy por encima, porque claramente se pueden profundizar en todas las líneas que vamos marcando, hay un término que ha vuelto a tomar moda en la Argentina, que es el fascismo, y la pregunta es si el mileísmo es fascismo.
So with these, there's in Argentina there's an old term that has become fashionable again, which is neoliberalism and fascism. And the question that we ought to answer is if the Mileism is indeed fascist.
Y analizando la variable de la definición económica, lo distintivo del Milei, de Milei es el carácter antidemocrático que sostiene, pero también el populismo en sus declaraciones, al no necesitar intermediarios con el pueblo y buscar una relación directa, sin intermediarios, ni siquiera el de las instituciones democráticas.
So what is key in Milei is his anti-democratic orientation, but also his populism, the populism in his declarations, in his statements. Because if we recall correctly, the formal definition of populism, it's a leader communicating directly with his followers. He does not need any intermediaries whatsoever with the people, and has a direct relation, not even of democratic institutions.
En 4 meses desde que es presidente, ha avanzado por encima de todas las instituciones de la República. El Congreso de la Nación ha avanzado encima de las autonomías provinciales, de la metodología de formación de leyes y hasta de la propia Constitución Nacional.
So in just 4 months of government, he has gone by disregarding every institution of the Republic, be it the National Congress, the Congress, passing by the provinces authorities, and issuing laws by presidential decree that are even going against the national constitution.
Yo elegí 2 definiciones que son las que están en la placa, que las podés leer, Manuel, así podemos avanzar.
Okay, I chose 2 definitions of fascism that you can see on screen, which are neoliberal fascism is a political economic formation specific that mixes economic orthodoxy, militarism. It despises institutions and laws. It is racist, is white supremacist, machist, like misogynist, and it bears a hate to intellectuals. The other definition, fascism is the love of the chieftain of the caudillo, the nationalist, racist. It despises the weak, the inferior, the foreigner. It creates violence against its adversaries, or as they would denote them, enemies. It has disdain for rights and dignity of every person.
Todo lo que expresan estas 2 definiciones se aplica en Argentina desde hace 4 meses, lamentablemente, salvo las 2 palabras que están en rojo, dado que hasta ahora no hay signo de militarismo, ni mucho menos de nacionalismo, dado que en esa particularidad Milei resulta ser bastante antinacionalista.
So by these two definitions, Milei fits well, except for the two words that are highlighted in red, which is militarism and nationalism. Until now, he hasn't shown any signs of militarism. And with regard to nationalism itself, this Milei is pretty particular because he actually is quite anti-nationalist.
Solamente con ver sus redes sociales van a poder tener una prueba empírica de que todo esto que expresan estas definiciones lo estamos viviendo en Argentina.
So just by reviewing his Twitter and Instagram, you can see that what has just been said is true to reality.
Todo eso se sostiene en una formación populista de derecha.
This is all sustained in a right-wing populism configuration.
Que considera el sistema representativo y la democracia en general están estructuralmente corrompidos por los políticos. Entonces, de esa manera, usa el enojo masivo que hay en la sociedad argentina contra la política, contra las instituciones, contra el Poder Judicial. Él monopoliza toda esa frustración y ese enojo y generó una vinculación directa con sectores masivos de la sociedad.
So, his strategy is basically to portray representative democracy as structurally corrupt by politicians, and he uses the anger he creates, the massive anger and frustration he creates in order to direct it to the political institution, the politicians and the democracy's institutions, even the judiciary branch, and basically he monopolizes all this frustration and anger in a very direct way for his political agenda.
Y construyó un concepto para identificarlo que es la casta.
And he actually created a concept of his own to portray all these institutions and actors of democracy, which is the caste.
En esa palabra condensa todo el enojo y la frustración contra el sistema político, que creo que hay una base muy contradictoria en eso, tanto en Milei, que la usa relativamente, como en la sociedad que la toma como una forma de expresión de esa bronca.
So this word summarizes all the anger and frustration against the political system, and with it he created and I think that there's a very contradictory substrate to it, as Milei, and so it's used in a relative way by Milei, as well as people in general. They just use it as in a very vague way to direct their anger.
Y de esta manera surge este populismo de derecha en Argentina, también debido a que de alguna forma la sociedad entendió que las otras opciones electorales en el 2023, tanto Massa como Bullrich, eran dos caras de una misma moneda y eligen lo disruptivo para poder superar esta falta de propuestas superadoras desde el punto de vista de gran parte de la sociedad.
In this way, Argentina is seeing right-wing populism that is also due to, in some way, because the whole society understood through the electoral alternatives of 2023, be it former Minister of Finance Sergio Massa or Patricia Bullrich, were basically two sides of the same coin. And in this way, as there were no, it was basically it was understood that there were no good alternatives. Basically, society just has fallen into Milei.
Y ahí
Carolina,
va la pregunta de por qué gana Milei. Me la hacen mucho en muchos lugares, especialmente con quienes no viven en Argentina o siguen los pasos de nuestro país, pero bueno, viven en otros países y así como ustedes están tratando de entender por qué ganó Milei y por qué hoy Argentina tiene un gobierno de derechas.
So the question is why Milei wins, and as a person in a direct relationship with the political system, I might try to get an answer for that.
Carolina, ya son 25 minutos. It's been 25 minutes. So we need to start wrapping up. Si podés empezar a cerrar la presentación, por favor.
Bueno, la verdad es que bueno, nos hemos demorado un poquito. Vamos a pasar, Manuel. A ver, creemos, acá les voy a dejar uno de los datos. Es multicausal y hay muchas razones por las cuales Milei gana la elección, pero nosotros entendemos que uno de los elementos característicos es esto, que es la evolución de la informalidad, del trabajo informal y la falta de respuesta del sistema a esta situación.
So there are many reasons, but this is one key element that we think is explanatory of why we are in this political situation, which is the evolution of people working in the gray economy. And as you can see, the system hasn't been giving answer to it. We have around 37% of the population working in the gray economy.
Acá vemos cómo la situación ocupacional se caracteriza por, bueno, Manuel, vos lo podés definir, entonces creemos que la puja distributiva se generó dentro del propio electorado del peronismo, que terminó expulsando a gran parte de su electorado a elegir otras opciones.
So as you can see here, this is the structure of employment in Argentina. Only 44% are workers with a formal employer. 25% are working at in the gray economy. 7 are unemployed, and 18% are just working on their own. And this structure basically broke the traditional electorate of Peronism into pieces and has given birth to this new political reality.
Y esto acompaña un poco ese análisis que nosotros hacemos, porque donde ven la columna del 19%, el quintil de los anteúltimos, decimos en términos de ingresos, es que la mayoría de las políticas públicas del gobierno anterior estuvieron volcadas al 10% de los sectores más vulnerables y quizás a la clase media, pero hubo un gran porcentaje de este 19%, que son los anteúltimos, que se sintieron fuera del sistema y son los que focalizaron, digamos, su bronca en todos los demás, y desequilibraron la balanza electoral en favor de Milei.
So one of the issues here, we see the evolution of income by social group between 2011 and 2021. We have the last quintile that saw its income being reduced by 10%. But the second quintile, which are the second poorest share of the population, had no response from the previous government and has seen its income being reduced by almost 20%. And this is the group that has given Milei its access to government.
Bueno, vamos a dejar acá las placas, habían algunas más, les dejo la presentación ahí. Pero bueno, claramente estamos ante un fenómeno muy difícil de analizar en términos de las formas en que se va desarrollando y la enorme cantidad de contradicciones respecto a lo que representa y a lo que efectivamente está haciendo. Y me voy a ir a la presentación de Matías, que fue realmente muy claro en términos de lo que está pasando en la Argentina, económicamente.
So, of course, this is an ongoing phenomenon. It's very difficult to analyze in terms of the forms it's being developed. We are all learning as it happens. It has a large number of contradictions with respect to what it represents and what's effectively happening. But I'll point out to Matias' presentation that was, in my opinion, very good to represent what's happening in economic terms.
Y para terminar, sí creo que en el diagnóstico, más allá de las cuestiones económicas, de la inflación, del empleo y de los datos de la macroeconomía argentina, hay una explicación también política, donde hay una crisis de representación de los partidos políticos tradicionales y una distancia muy, muy grande de lo que la dirigencia política cree y sostiene y de lo que la gente necesita y el manejo de las expectativas de la sociedad.
So to finish my presentation, I want to say that setting aside things like the macroeconomy, economy, and so on and so forth, I think that there's a key issue with political representation. There's a crisis of political parties, the traditional political parties, and there's a substantial difference between what the leaders of the leading politicians believe and sustain, and what the population is demanding and their expectations.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Carolina. Thank you, Matias. Thank you, Ramiro. Let me sort of kind of wrap up, first of all, this sort of at least the recording by thanking you all, the three of you, very, very much for participating, and everyone for listening and bearing with us. So yes, thank you, Ramiro. Thank you, Matias, and thank you, Carolina. Don't leave necessarily just yet, just thanking you first as Santiago stops the presentation. So yes, thank you.